He lost his only friend when a foster family threw him out and sent his beloved dog to a shelter, without warning, without goodbye. Years of silence, military service, and emotional scars followed, all rooted in that one cruel decision. But fate wasn't finished. 8 years later, when hope was almost gone, it gave him one final chance to make things right. And just wait until you see how this emotional journey took a powerful turn, and why, in the end, justice finally came full circle. In the quiet countryside of Georgia, where the trees whispered gently in the breeze and the days passed slowly, there was a modest little house with chipped white paint and wind chimes that sang softly in the late afternoon light. On the back porch of that house, stretched out on an old blanket worn smooth by time, lay a dog named Max. Max was no ordinary dog, not anymore. He was 18 years old, a remarkable age for a Dogue de Bordeaux. His once powerful body had thinned, and the bold strength of youth had long since faded. His fur, once a deep auburn, was now peppered with gray. His eyes were cloudy, but they still carried a flicker of something unmistakable. Peace, perhaps, or love. The woman who sat in the rocking chair beside him was Ellen, 64 years old and alone for many years. Her face was lined not just by age, but by experience, by love lost, and quiet battles fought alone. She wasn't known for being particularly outgoing or loud. Most days, she stayed close to home, tending to her garden and humming to herself as she brewed sweet tea. But ask anyone in town, and they'd say the same thing. Ellen was kind, gentle, and strong in the way people rarely noticed until they really looked. 8 years ago, Max had wandered into her life. It was late autumn then, too, and he had been little more than skin and bones, his fur dull, his eyes dim, his spirit seemingly broken. He hadn't barked or growled when she first approached him near the old gas station on Route 10. He had just looked at her with a kind of tired hope. A dog on his last leg, a soul that hadn't quite given up. "I thought he was going to die right there in my arms," Ellen often recalled when neighbors asked about him. He was covered in old scars. His paws were torn up, but something about him, he wanted to live. He just needed someone to believe that he could. So, she brought him home. Slowly, day by day, Max began to heal, not just physically, but in ways that words can't explain. He started to trust again, to follow her from room to room, to lay his head gently in her lap when she sighed too deeply, or stayed quiet too long. In time, he stopped flinching at sudden sounds. He began to wag his tail, and Ellen, in turn, found herself smiling more. He wasn't just a pet, he was a presence. In those early days of their life together, Ellen had still been grieving. Her husband had passed unexpectedly, and the silence in the house had become too loud to bear. Friends had drifted, the days had blurred, and laughter had felt like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. Max changed that. He became her steady heartbeat in an uncertain world, her companion during long nights and slow Sundays, her reason to open the blinds and step outside each morning. Even now, when his steps were slower and his eyes closed more than they opened, he remained her comfort and her home. They had a rhythm, the two of them. Ellen would sit with a book and tea while Max lay curled up nearby, his breathing a gentle, steady reminder that she wasn't alone. And when the wind would rustle the tall grass out back, Ellen often imagined he was listening too, remembering the days when he used to run across that yard like a puppy, chasing butterflies and barking at the breeze. Max had seen the last chapter of Ellen's life begin, and in a way, he had become the reason that chapter wasn't empty. To outsiders, it might have seemed simple, an old woman and her old dog, but to them, it was everything. Max didn't need to speak. His loyalty was louder than words. His presence said all that needed to be said. "I'm here." I stayed, and Ellen, with a hand gently resting on his back, would whisper softly as the day ended, "You're my good boy, Max. You saved me too." It was a quiet afternoon when the knock came, gentle, hesitant. Ellen wiped her hands and made her way to the door, expecting maybe a delivery, a neighbor, but certainly not him. Standing there was a young man in a military uniform. His hair was neatly cut, his stance formal, but something in his eyes looked unsteady, like someone on the edge of something they weren't ready to feel. In his hand, he held a small, worn photograph. It was faded at the corners, almost falling apart from time. In the photo, a teenage boy smiling wide in the summer sun, arm around a puppy with a small white patch above one eye. Max. The young man's voice cracked when he asked, "Is it him?" Ellen looked past him toward the dog lying in the warm light of the porch. Max had barely stirred all morning. Still, she nodded. The man's knees softened. His name was Jake. He explained slowly, his voice catching. He had grown up and in the foster system. Max was his only real friend. When he turned 16, the family that had taken him in told him to leave. Max was surrendered to a shelter. Jake never got the chance to say goodbye. After that, life moved fast. He joined the Marines, served overseas, drifted from place to place. But the ache of losing Max never faded. Then, just weeks ago, he stumbled upon a photo in a rescue forum, a dog with the same white spot above the eye. He followed every lead until it brought him to Ellen's door. He stepped onto the porch slowly. "Max!" he called. Max didn't respond at first, but then something shifted. The old dog's ears lifted, his head turned, he rose on trembling legs, one step, then another, and then, almost impossibly, he moved faster, until he reached Jake's feet and collapsed into his arms, letting out a sound that broke Ellen's heart wide open. He remembered. Ellen turned away, stepping quietly into the house, not wanting anyone to see her tears. For 2 beautiful days, Jake and Max were together again. Jake told him stories, fed him gently, brushed his fur, and let him sleep with his head in his lap. But on the 3rd morning, Max wouldn't eat. He couldn't stand. The vet came and spoke softly. Max had held on for something, for someone, and now that his boy was home, he didn't need to hold on anymore. Jake didn't fight it. He just stayed beside him, whispering, "It's okay, buddy. I'm here." Max had waited 8 long years. He had given everything he had left for this one last moment. And now he was ready to rest. Jake didn't sleep that night. He lay beside Max on the old rug in Ellen's living room, the same rug where Max had curled up 1,000 times before. The room was dim and quiet, filled only with the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the steady, fragile rhythm of Max's breathing. The weight of what was coming hung in the air, but Jake didn't rush it. He stayed still, present, giving Max the one thing he had always deserved: time. He pulled out a notebook. It had traveled with him through every deployment, every lonely station, every sleepless night. Inside were years of unsent letters to Max, pages filled with stories, apologies, and questions, things he had never said out loud until now. He read them softly, one by one. He told Max how much he missed him, how he had cried himself to sleep as a teenager in strange houses, calling out for the only soul who had ever made him feel truly to be safe. He spoke of the anger he had carried, the shame, the guilt, and how seeing Max again, after all these years, felt like finally breathing after being underwater too long. Max didn't stir much, but his tail twitched once, his eyes fluttered, and when Jake said, "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner," Max exhaled slowly, as if releasing something he'd held on to all this time. When morning came, soft and pale, Jake wrapped Max in a warm blanket and lifted him gently into the truck. Ellen stood quietly by the doorway, one hand over her heart. She didn't speak. She simply nodded. The forest clearing was just as Jake remembered it, still, untouched, sacred. The tall pines stood like guardians, and the sunlight streamed through the branches in golden strands. Birds sang softly above them, and the wind whispered like an old song. Jake sat down in the grass, Max in his lap. He stroked his fur, whispering thanks, promises, memories. Max looked up at him one last time, and then, peacefully, without fear, he let go. Jake held him close long after. There were no words, just stillness, just gratitude. When he returned to Ellen's house, he wasn't the same man. He stayed, not just for a few nights, not as a visitor, but as someone who belonged. Ellen didn't ask questions. She simply made more room at the table, added his laundry to hers, and let the silence between them become something warm and familiar. Jake started volunteering at the local animal shelter. Quietly at first, walking the nervous dogs, cleaning pens, repairing broken fences. But soon it became more. He found purpose in those routines, in the gentle healing of forgotten animals. Every time he looked into a pair of eyes that seemed to say, "Please don't leave me," he remembered Max. And in that memory, he found strength. He didn't try to replace Max. He never could. But he honored him with every kind gesture, every hour spent beside a frightened animal, every second chance he helped make possible. Because this wasn't just a story about an old dog. It was about loyalty and loss, about the long road home and how sometimes it takes nearly losing everything to understand what truly matters. Max had waited. Not just for Jake to return, but for Jake to forgive himself, to stop running, to stay. And when he finally did, it changed everything. Jake carried Max's love forward, not as a shadow of the past, but as a light that guided him into something new. Because sometimes the most extraordinary goodbyes are the ones that lead us back to ourselves.